Wow, where do I even start? With all the craziness going on in the world right now, this lands on my desk and everything just got a whole lot better. Axial fans, it's here, the new SCX10 and it is pretty exciting. There is a lot of new features on here. It is not at all the old SCX10 that we're used to. They went to town and they built this thing basically from the ground up. There's very few shared parts on this vehicle in comparison to its predecessors, and I had a great time building up this kit. It is a full build up kit right now. So there is the kit box back there. There's my old Wrangler as well, my SCX10 That's not going to get shelved. Still going to run it, but it's a full build up kit. You get an instruction manual, you get a bunch of bags of parts, and you have to go and build it up. And I'll give you some building tips and things I found a bit later in this review. But right now, let's start off by talking about the body, because the body is really awesome on this. And I know it's another Jeep, it's another Wrangler, but here's the deal, guys. Axial has the license with Jeep. You know, they worked with Jeep to do promotions and stuff like that. So I think it's only natural that they go and use the Jeep body, and they had it on their predecessor vehicles, and it's just awesome to see here. Everybody loves a Jeep, and I know maybe some of you guys out there may be like, well, why didn't they do a Mitsubishi Pajero? And maybe, yeah, 30 guys like that, but you know what? The mass audience is going to like a Wrangler, and you still get the option of swapping out the body if you want to. They have spare body mounts in the box that you go and put other bodies on there if you wish. But this one is pretty awesome. Don't just discount it right off the bat, because there's a lot of scale detail in this. And what I like from the start on this body is it was pre-cut from the factory, which is awesome. That just takes up so much time cutting the body and drilling the holes. All that was done for you. So kudos to Axial for doing that. So awesome. But the awesomeness doesn't end there, because there's also an interior. It's a Lexan interior. It's got a lot of detail in there as far as seats, and it's got a driver figure molded in. The head is separate. It's the Axial driver head, where you could go and put a cowboy hat on or a baseball cap on, but you go and detail the guy however you want. There's also a steering wheel in there and a roll cage, so that is pretty cool that it gives you all that scale detail in there right out of the box. You don't have to go and buy it aftermarket. So beyond the interior, back on the outside, even the front grille is cut out so you can see the radiator behind it. That's pretty awesome right there, that you've got that scale detail, that depth of the grille. And actually attached to the radiator is the headlight buckets, which they went and chromed. So when you do go and add LED lights into there, it will shine much brighter, and it is an option. The LEDs are an option, and since this is a full build-up kit, I'm going to give them a pass on that. Usually I like my LED lights included with the kit, but this is a build kit, so you guys get a pass on that one, Axial. But you do have the option to put LEDs in the headlights and actually in the taillights. And the taillights are separate lenses. They're molded in a translucent red plastic, so those look pretty awesome. They got some decals to further enhance the detail of it. But then also on the outside, we've got a cowl in the front here that we have windshield wipers attached to, and that actually helps retain the interior as well. There's two screws that go up through the body, and then into that cowl that secure all that. There's also hood vents in the front. We've got mirrors on the side with chrome decals to go on the back side of the mirrors. We've got door handles, and then a rear plate that actually acts as the body mount as well. And as you can see, there's no body clips visible from the top here. That's cool as well. It's about time that we've hidden all the body posts on a scale vehicle. So Axial, you did a great job there as well. Beyond that, we also have the little latches for the hood. The hood doesn't pop up, which is kind of a bummer since there's a scale engine under here, but maybe you could go ahead and cut that out later. I'm sure people are going to do that. That'll be a really cool mod to do. And then we've got pretty nice fender flares on here as well. Really nice matte look to them, and they've got screws that go in through the backside with a plate, so it's really secure. And there's even little tabs on those mounting plates for the fender flares, so you can go and run your wires through it, so you don't have wires kind of just dangling around on the inside of the thing. But they did a great job on this body. I think you're really going to enjoy the look of the body once you get it. And you get to paint it the color that you like. I did this burnt orange color. It's Tamiya orange, backed with Tamiya copper, and then back with Tamiya black. And then I did a gunmetal interior, and just painted the guy with some Tamiya paints that I had as well. Looks pretty awesome. There are those body mounts. We've got two in the front and two in the rear. And again, it really secures the body down. All right, now let's talk about the chassis, and everything's all new. I mean, there's a lot to talk about, but let's start off in the front. So bumper-wise, I probably should have mentioned this while the body was on, but we've got CRC bumpers front and rear, and it's really tucked in. So there's good approach angle in the front, good decent angle for the rear, and it is adjustable. You can slide them in and out like you do with a normal axial bumper setup. But right behind the bumper here is the body mount, so you'll see these little hoops where the body mounts go, and you basically just slide your body clips in from underneath. Takes a little getting used to, but it's definitely much better than seeing body posts on the outside. All right, now right behind there, you probably already noticed it has Fender Wells from the factory. Very awesome there as well, and they transition into floor pans basically on both sides, and it looks like they even have little notches cut out for maybe an optional rock light setup. So I'm guessing we're going to see that in the future. So we're already seeing potential option parts. And nestled between the two Fender Wells is the engine cover, and underneath is the motor. It accepts a 540 motor in there, but here is your engine setup. We've got the air intake, we've got the manifold up top, we've got our pulleys in front with the serpentine belt, and you could of course go ahead and detail those however you want. I did not do that because I wanted to get outside and drive this thing first, and I'll go ahead and I'll detail it later. But pretty neat that they go ahead and give you that. And as you can see next to it, that's actually the Servo, chassis mounted Servo. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. All right, so we got a lot of detail features that we've talked about. Let's get into the chassis of this. And it's still the steel frame chassis in here, and it's not the one-piece chassis anymore that we've seen on so many vehicles. There's now actually 4 rails, and 2 of the rails key together, and what that does is it allows you to extend the rear of the chassis rather than moving shock towers around to adjust your wheelbase. You will still need the optional links depending on the wheelbase that you want to go with, but now you slide the chassis back by using alternate holes rather than moving shock towers around. So I like the chassis. We've got cross braces in the front and rear, and I mean just a tad bit of chassis flex. I mean, if you're a true like pro driver, maybe you're going to notice that, but for the majority of us that are going out and having fun with the vehicle, a little bit of chassis flex is fine in my opinion. Now I kind of touched on this before, but it does have the side plates for your floor pans basically, but they're also mounts for your electronics. So over here, I actually have my battery set up, and there's 2 positions where you could go ahead and put your battery. You could put it in the rear, or you could put a Shorty pack on the side. And these battery mounts, they are actually adjustable. They slide in and out to adjust to the size of your battery, and then it's a simple Velcro strap. So I decided not to use the rear mount with a standard pack. I had a bunch of these Shorty packs, 2S packs, so that's why I went over here. And you could actually run 2 batteries if you want to. You could run your main pack back here, and you can have an accessory pack if you have a number of different things that you're going to run off of it, maybe a winch and some lights and stuff like that. So that option is there. On the other side here is our receiver box, and it is a sealed receiver box. There is a seal that goes around the top of the box, and there's a seal for the wires. However, if you are going to run a bunch of servos like I am, to run the dig and the 2-speed, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit, it gets pretty cramped as far as getting all the wires in there and packaging up all the wires in there. So I don't have all the gaskets in this one. I'm just going to stay away from the water, but just something I wanted to make you guys aware of. If you're going to run everything and plan on getting this thing wet, you're going to have to do a little bit of sealing with this receiver box. And then this is also where your speed controller goes. I got a Tekin BXR that I'm going to be using with this for now. And then I'll go and talk about the servos in a little bit. But that really rounds out the chassis details. Now let's move on to the transmission. The transmission is very cool. As you can see, it kind of looks like a realistic transmission. We've got our front mounted motor, so we got all the weight over the front wheels. I like that, and the servos up front as well. And then it goes into this transmission bell housing look to it. And then back here is a transfer case. And there's a number of different components that make up the casing itself on here. And inside is all steel gears, all steel shafts, all ball bearings. Even the spur gear on here is metal as well. There are slipper pads. So if you're worried about your drivetrain taking hard hits, it does have a slipper clutch in there. But there's a series of gears because there is a 2-speed inside of this, and you could build it without it. The option is there. It comes from the factory setup, so you could run it as a 2-speed. but they'll give you a spacer if you just want to lock it out in one particular gear. And then here is the shift servo in here. So if you want to build it with a 3-channel radio system, so you could go and shift on the fly your 2 speeds, you can go ahead and do that. And that's actually how I set it up. I actually have it set up as a 4-channel rig because I also have the dig working as well. So here is the dig servo back here, and it mates up to the shift lever here. And this allows you to go ahead and lock the rear wheels for a dig function. And for those of you that don't know what that is, because we have a lot of new people that watch the RC Driver channel, when you go and put the dig on, this will lock up the rear end and it will only allow the front wheels to drive. And that will basically allow you to move the front end where you need to while the rear of the vehicle is dragging. Or if you're descending down a hill and you need to suck the front end down while you're descending the hill to keep everything stable, you can go ahead and do that as well. A dig function comes in very handy. Might be a little bit overboard for a scaler. I'll talk about that later on down the road in the performance section of it. But that is the options there right out of the box. You don't have to go and adapt anything to it by any aftermarket parts other than the servo if you want to operate it. And these servos actually have little servo savers on top of them that allow the servo to go a little bit past where they're supposed to be. So it does go and protect these servos from damage, but I would, of course, go in and set your endpoints if you are going to go and use that stuff. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in the performance. But that's the transmission there. Really cool setup. Again, really large ball bearings used throughout, so it's going to be a rugged transmission by the looks of it. Now, underneath, it's the Wild Boar axles. Here is something that we're familiar with. The Wild Boar drive shafts go out to new axles front and rear. We still have the same metal universals in the Wild Boar drive shafts, and it's a proven drive shaft, so I don't see why they would have changed it anyway. But here it is. Here is one of the major features of this rig. Axial now has portals for their SCX10 chassis, and here it is. It's the AR45, and they're basically like the Capra axles that we saw before, just scaled down to fit within a scale chassis width. And it has really large bearings in there, really large output bearings to support the bevel pinion gear. We've got a 6-bolt locker spool that's inside that mates up with a hypoid ring gear, steel machine cut gear, which is really good. It looks really well made. I mean, I don't think there is going to be gear train problems on this just by looking at it. Really nicely cut gears, and everything just falls together nice and easily inside of it. The axles in here, AR45 universal axles in the front. They will allow up to 45-degree steering angle, which pretty much every crawler needs to do at this point if you want to be on top in the steering game. So you just get a ton of steering, thanks to the way everything is set up. We've got really nice portal box steering knuckles on the outside and the front. It's a solid setup in the rear. But yeah, it's got captured links for the steering link and just a simple kingpin screw to hold it to the axle. And it looks like there's enough meat here on the end of the axles. I'm hoping that there isn't going to be an issue if you go and drop this thing off a big rock that it'll crack here. But, when you scale things down, that's kind of the stuff you got to look out for. But I think that it looks like they braced everything just right. We've got our axial pumpkin cover, the red axial pumpkin cover that we've known so well. And, it's a really high clearance pinion setup as well, so it's not going to go and drag on the rocks. You got a really decreased angle up to the transmission. And you'll notice that the front is offset while the rear is in the center, so it's not just a reused center section setup. It is specific to the front and rear of this. So I like the way it's set up. It's really nice. I've actually already been out driving with it, and it works really well. Little performance talk for you there. While I have the car flipped over, I just noticed some more detail here in the transmission case. Here's an oil pan, basically for the transmission oil pan down below. So there's even scaled detail on the bottom of this. Oh, and then one other thing. I did want to go and talk about the motor plate on here. It does have a metal motor plate. Very cool. Do like that. But the lower mount for that motor plate, you have to go ahead and put some nuts in there, some small little 3mm nuts. And if you're not careful, they'll fall out. So a little tip there is to add a little bit of glue so they don't fall out. Not a huge fan of the way that is set up, but I guess it works once you go and add that glue in there. And just be careful when you do go and put the motor in with the mount. If you don't position it just right, it is possible to cinch down the top retainer and still have the motor twisted a little bit. So just make sure it's seated properly when you go and put everything together. All right, now let's go ahead and talk about the suspension on here. So 3-link in the front, 4-link in the rear, new panhard bar setup. It's got a Z-bend to it and a pretty nice looking mount as well. I noticed there was actually a spare mount in the spares bag that's in the kit. But just a smaller link than we're used to seeing. Usually we see a large link like the rest of them, but it's a smaller Z-bend wire, and new specific tie rod ends to this particular panhard bar setup. But there are our heavy-duty links on the bottom, kind of like we saw on the Capra. These are actually just really large tie rods. So with the hole in the center, you can go and adjust it to make sure the length of the links are correct. Once you have it on there, those adjustments are easy. The rear link setup is refined from what I've read to help reduce the torque twist, which the axles also help in doing. But there is a small revision there, but it still retains the same geometry that we love from an SCX10 from what they're saying. So I do like that because the SCX10 works really well right out of the box. It always has. That's why so many people have gravitated towards this rig. So it's great that it's still going to handle the same from the sounds of it. The shocks on here, there are a metal body threaded shock, so you go to just the preload collars. There are 2 different springs. There's a green spring and a red spring. The green spring goes up front. The instructions don't outline that, and it took me a little while to figure that out, but I'm letting you guys know. But these are an emulsion style of shock. They do have a bleeder cap on the top, which makes bleeding these out really easily, getting the right amount of oil in there so you don't have hydrolock. It is a dual O-ring in the cartridge below to seal everything up, and it does have the spring perch retainers on the bottom with the screw through it as well, so the perch doesn't fall off when you're driving. So the suspension setup, pretty awesome on here, and then the shocks mount to the composite shock towers, and you're going to have to go and pre-tap the holes on the top because it's a really stiff plastic. So before you go and attach the shock screws, make sure you do that just to make your life easier and you don't strip out any holes in there. But there's a number of different positions for the shock in the front and in the rear if you want to go and tune it. Where before we would only have 2 holes, there's a number of different holes now to go and move the shock position around. So that really just rounds out the suspension now. Let me talk about the steering really quick. So it is the chassis mounted steering. You've got the heavy duty steering and drag links in the front, but they went and gave us metal servo horns right out of the box. 2 of them. There's a 25 tooth spline horn and a 23 tooth spline horn in there. So I've got a Spektrum Servo in there. So my 23 tooth spline horn is on there. That's pretty cool that they do that. You don't have to go and search for one as soon as you get the kit from Axial. So beyond that, they did go and make sure that bump steer on this is pretty much non-existent, and by the looks of it, it looks like they got it right. That's pretty awesome. A lot of people are really focused on bump steer for some reason. But that is good to go there. And now we can move on to, I guess, the wheels and tires. So we've got Method wheels on here. They are a satin chrome finish on the outside. It's a beadlock style, so it's a 3-piece wheel. And it is a vented rim from the factory and uses 6 screws to pinch down on the 3-piece wheel. And then wrapped around it are Nato Trail Grappler tires. These look a little bit beefier because they are. They are taller than the Nato Trail Grapplers we're used to seeing, and they are a bit wider as well. So not only are they a meatier tire to go and grab onto rocks and dirt and stuff like that, but they're also a bit taller, so it gives you a little bit of ground clearance. But if you go ahead and put a standard SCX10-2 up against this, this isn't jacked up off the ground. In fact, the chassis looks a little bit lower. Just everything is kind of raised up in the center for, with the portal axles, with the tires, so you have better ground clearance. You're able to crawl over rocks and ruts and whatever is in front of you while you're out there on the trail. So they put a lot into this truck. There is a lot of cool stuff throughout this thing, and it did go together fairly easily. There were some hiccups in the instruction manual. I thought after the Capra manual incident we'd have a perfect one here, but there are some areas where you really have to study the picture, and actually there's a group out there already that has some of the instruction manual kind of errors pointed out with tips on how to, what to do in those particular steps. I know one of them that I saw was the horn for the dig was on the wrong side. Knowing where the springs were, that was another one. There's a couple spots where the screw size is not correct that's in there. So definitely check out those Facebook groups. That will help you out if you're having troubles building this thing. But everything else went together fairly well. There was a couple spots, like when I put the chassis together, that I kind of had to put the screw in on an angle in order to get everything to line up properly. But other than that, the drivetrain went together pretty well. The gears were a little bit tricky, and sometimes the bearing would fall out. But and again, you know, that motor plate, just keep an eye out on that. But this thing went together well. And just be aware that when you go and put the dig servos in there, if you are using in the shift servo, if you're using the Spektrum servos, I'll put a link to those in the description below. You are going to need servo extension leads because they have a very short lead on them that won't reach the receiver box. But there are a number of aftermarket servos out there as well that you could probably go and adapt to this that may have a longer lead. So just be aware of that. That's really it. I'm going to go ahead and run this on a 2S Lipo battery with a 27 turn motor. I basically just ripped all this stuff out of my Capra because I didn't have my servo and electronics in time. They are coming from Holmes Hobbies, and I'm going to do a follow-up video with running it on Holmes Hobbies. But we're going to go out right now for a first run so we can see how the new Axial SCX10 drives. So that was my first run with the SCX10 and that was actually over at a local park pretty close to my house that not a lot of people go to. Actually, nobody really knows it's here in my town, and so it's a great place for me to go and just give a vehicle a first shakedown, There's not a ton of crazy terrain there to really challenge a rig, but again, a first shakedown, it's a perfect spot for that type of stuff. And it was a great time with the SCX10 just getting used to how it works, because there is a dig function in there, there's a 2-speed in there, and so that's a lot of button pushing on the radio, so it was a perfect spot for me to go and figure all of that out. But this is a very capable rig from what I could tell so far, and I'm going to do some more driving videos with it to challenge this chassis some more, but again, I'm just got to give you my initial feel, my initial impressions in that setting that you guys saw. And first up, this thing has a ton of steering with that 45 degrees of potential steering throw on this. It really turns around nice and smooth and quick, and especially when you pair it with the dig, this thing could get around some crazy obstacles. And I just to challenge it, I was kind of just going around a tree stump over some rocks and roots and stuff and locking up the dig, and it really just pulls that front end around, which is really awesome, and just a whole nother element to add to your driving fun when you're out there wheeling this thing. The Spektrum Servo that I had in here had plenty of torque for the general use that I was putting it through. The steering is solid on here, doesn't need any modifications, especially since you have the aluminum horn on there. Onto the handling of it through the rough stuff, the suspension just seems to float. The chassis stays nice and smooth, and you could just see the suspension working so smooth and just fluid as it should over the rocks and rough stuff. And there is certainly plenty of ground clearance with these portal axles. I basically went and located some rocks that I could go over, just see how much clearance I could get. And on your standard trail use, where I was driving it, this cleared a lot of stuff. Actually, the axles didn't hang up. The center skid is where I hung stuff up, hung this vehicle up on rocks. But the suspension seemed to work well. The weight distribution, when I found a little bit of side hilling to do, it didn't roll. There's not a scratch on this body because I didn't roll it through the entire time of driving it. And what really impressed me was just going up some of the inclines. One, from the approach and descent angles of the bumpers, to two, the incline that I could get this vehicle up. I take a lot of vehicles there to test, and this by far beat out a lot of crawlers that I've tested there as far as going up certain inclines on certain rocks. The suspension, again, just kind of just twists and fluidly moves over everything. Definitely like how much articulation you can get out of it. I did leave the spring purchase just pretty much all the way up, so this thing is really set in kind of a sag mode, so you could see how much I could raise it up. And when you do that, there is a little bit of tire catch on the Fender Wells when you're steering this thing, and maybe you've got the chassis all twisted up. But they did a great job here. I don't know if I'm going to actually change anything on that either. They give you the 35 weight oil in there. That seems to be great for general use, and that's typically just the way I drive my stuff. Definitely like the suspension. Power-wise, again, I ran it on a 2S battery pack. I did have the 27-turn axial brushed motor out of my Capra in here. It's got some decent wheel speed to it. A couple spots, it didn't have enough wheel speed for me. I probably would have liked the 3S battery. But it's got some speed to it. It's got a nice slow crawl when you need it. I have the Tekin BXR speed controller in there, so I had a nice smooth crawl feel. And some of that rocks, those inclines I was telling you about, where it really impressed me, it had a nice smooth feel to it. And the drivetrain is relatively quiet. It's not a loud grinding drivetrain or anything. It's pretty smooth. It's not totally quiet, but it's very smooth sounding. And then as far as shifting goes, you could shift on the fly with the 2-speed. You could switch it over, and really this thing will start to scoot once you do go switch the gears. And how I set it up on my DX5 is I've got it set up on channel F here, so I could just go and rock that switch, and it'll switch over to the 2-speed. And then actually for the dig, I have it on button G, so I could just press that button there, and it'll operate the dig function and let it go. And the dig should let go. It did get hung up a couple of times, and when you go and really suck down the rear end, like what I was doing was dragging the rear coming down some rocks. And when I was doing that, it would kind of just lock in. So I would actually have to hit reverse just a little bit for it to kind of pop back out. So depending on how you use it, sometimes it worked fine, it popped back out on its own, but sometimes it would get stuck a little bit. So just be aware of that. And I think, you know, I might actually just go and eliminate the dig. I'm not sure if that's my thing for driving a scale vehicle. I definitely love it when I'm driving the Capra. But, you know, definitely, I would say try it. You know, it's in there. It's just an extra servo. Make sure you have the right radio system. And it might be right up your alley. But I do like the two-speed option. There's some straights to the trail that I was going on, and just, you know, opening it up and just switching the gears and watching this thing kick in and just kind of boost along. That was very cool. But overall, this is just a fun rig. I really like it. I don't really have any complaints right now. Definitely nothing as far as durability goes. I didn't launch it off of rocks or anything like that to check durability on axles or links or anything like that. You know, it was just general trail driving, so I don't have any durability issues. The only issue was that dig just kind of hanging up a little bit. The body can be a little funky to go onto the frame sometimes. They have these rock sliders, which I don't think I mentioned before, where the body sits in there and kind of captures it, which is very cool, but you gotta really align things to get it into place and then slide your body clips in. So it's just getting used to that. But overall, I really like the SCX10 I think they did a great job with this. They didn't reinvent the wheel, but they refined it in a way that really is useful, that I think a lot of people are going to enjoy, that has a lot of features that people are going to be really excited about. And when it comes down to it, it's a great trail rig. It's going to be super capable, and there is just going to be a ton of people glomming onto this thing. So if you're thinking about one of these, I would say go for it. Pull the trigger on it. I think you're going to love it.